I spend a lot of time on dating apps. One, because I like dating, but two, because I like relating with others intimately. And I like being able to explore myself through the lens of other people and to gain a broader perspective of what the human experience is through intimacy, through relationship, through connection, through pleasure, through play.
Oh, welcome back, everyone, to the Pelvic Pulse podcast. We are just laughing our butts off already because I've never shared what I do before recordings, but I usually guide people in just a little bit of a grounding experience to center and feel more awakened to their voice while being tapped into their pelvic bowls and their roots. And here I am trying to guide Uni in this sweet little just mini meditation. And the sweet dog that's in her lap, little Peanut, was licking her in the mouth. And we just couldn't get past that. So here we are. Thank you for being here, Uni.
Yeah, thank you for having me and having me back, I guess I should say too.
Yeah, absolutely. You are a second time comer honor this post, this podcast. And yeah, as we were off recording, we were talking about the last time we tried to schedule this second time to record together. And it was on the schedule, but it was 2 weeks beyond the point of when we were both like, yes, this is a go. Let's talk about this really important topic of I'm just going to keep it open for right now, but it's like XYZ, so many things. And it just kind of like the ship sailed. But just for backstory for people coming on now, we connected earlier this week and we've been, if you don't know Uni, we'll get into that, what she does and everything. And if you're not sure, you could also go back to season 1 and listen to her episode. But we were talking earlier this week and I feel like we were just able to line things up where today, just a few days later, we're able to hop on the mic and have a chat. And I was telling Uni that I feel like this part of the season is going to be so centered on sexual expression, sexual just empowerment and self love and intimacy and relationships. And whenever I think of just the word intimacy, intimately unique pops into my mind. So I did have to have you on here. And I am so grateful for you coming and sharing your, honestly, your personal experience, your interrelationship experiences, and the work that you do with people, people in the world. So, yay. Where are you at right now? How are you feeling in your body?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for having me and for that lovely introduction. I am currently in North Park in San Diego at my home, working out of my like home space. And I am feeling I'm feeling pretty in my body. So for those who maybe have been following me for a while or who know a little bit more about my backstory, a big part of my journey has been being in my body, being embodied, and kind of finding ways to move through and exist with like a very strong, like disassociative tendency. And
Mm,
so the like, even just like presenting the question of like, how are you feeling in your body? Like, is really important for me as like a daily practice, and I really value and appreciate that whenever I move into spaces that I'm sharing with others. So thanks for that.
yeah. And you know what? I actually don't normally really ask that, but I think I might from now on because I feel like also part of my work is getting people to stay connected in their bodies, especially say, for example, during the work I do, which is very intimate and it's very personal. It's different from person to person and their experiences with, say, doing just external body work, but also internal body work. And part of my thing is like, we're not leaving, like, we're not dissociating from each other here. We're going to stay connected through this entire time. and hold each other through maybe the discomfort, or I'll hold you in the discomfort. So thanks
Mhm.
for sharing that. I think that's an important piece, and actually like right off the bat, a really good practice for anyone that does have an disassociative tendency in any kind of space. But I feel like maybe particularly in interpersonal relationships. But yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I mean they're all beautiful words and relevant. So you you can speak for me.
Well, okay. Why don't we start with something? I'm just going to ask you like a really broad question because I'm actually genuinely curious how you would talk about it now. But like, what does it mean to be intimate with yourself and intimate with another, say in a romantic relationship, just or even in a friendship?
Yeah, so it's interesting. That question is, I feel like that question feels very accessible, right? Like whenever we think about relationship, we typically think about romantic partnership or sexual partnership. But what I've what I've really been exploring and playing with, um, and studying even over the last few years is like, how do we redefine things and how do we expand the way that we create definitions? And so relationship for me at this moment in life is, I feel that everything is relational. Like existing with one another is a relational experience, which creates the possibility for a relationship. And so I spend a lot of time on dating apps. One, because I like dating, but two, because I like relating with others intimately. And I like being able to explore myself through the lens of other people and to gain a broader perspective of what the human experience is through intimacy, through relationship, through connection, through pleasure, through play.
Mm.
And so, whenever I think about intimacy in general, intimacy to me and for me is an exploration and vulnerability. And it is a space that is a permission to become more connected to ourselves and to share that with others. And so intimacy can take many shapes and forms. And I think that the way that we give ourselves permission to feel into vulnerability creates a safety in being more intimate and being more exposed. And then whenever we connect with others, that mirrors the same way. And so I think that it's an ebb and flow where in order my own journey has been, and the journeys of others that I've been able to witness, specifically through like my work containers, has been the more intimate time I spend with myself, whether that's emotionally or physically or sexually or spiritually or mentally, the more confident I become in existing as a baseline intimately. And then the more comfortable I am existing as a baseline intimately, the more confident and secure I feel being intimate with other people. And when I'm met in that, when someone has security and intimacy and can meet me at a level in that, that gives me more confidence and comfort in being intimate with other people. And so it's been this like interesting dance where my default is to be really hard on myself, right? So if something doesn't go the way that I thought it was going to or perceived it to need to be, I internalize like, okay, what did I do wrong? And what I've really been shifting and like working on shifting is, okay, it's many, many parts that build connections and it's many, many parts that build relationships. And all of that comes from the way that we're experiencing and expressing and validating and defining and giving permission for intimacy.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. That's like, I don't know why, but I'm thinking of or wondering if you can kind of share maybe some past experiences recently where one, you've you've been able to cultivate this sense of confidence and security within yourself by developing this personal intimacy one-on-one with yourself and then showing up to a relationship, whether that was a friend or romantic or sexual partner, and they didn't have that same kind of development, which then say, I mean, I wonder how that shows up and what that looks like, or vice versa. And I'm sorry, I'm just like hearing Kita out of the side. She's snoring right behind me. um, but like when you say haven't like been like deeply connected to yourself for the moment, but then you decide to be with someone for the moment and they come in very confident, ready to be intimate with you, and you're like, no, yeah, what is that? What does that look like? And how, I guess, to also kind of like try to connect this because some people might not be able to mentally bridge this into like what does this have to do with pelvic health also, because that's kind of something I want to hear you explain that, and then I can riff off that too, because I feel like we can, we have a history of being able to go back and forth for long periods of time.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought that up because I've been thinking about you a lot these last few weeks as I've been like kind of processing some like personal things. And I've I have reached a place where like my disassociation is like at a different level than it has been before. And so like whenever I get activated, I disassociate. That can be from stress, that can be from like interpersonal conflict, that can be from feeling insecure. Like it can come from like literally anything. It's really annoying, to be honest. Because I'm like,
Totally.
oh, I'm just chilling, and then all of a sudden I'm like not in my body, and I'm like,
You
what the fuck? Like, how
blame it
did
on
this
the
happen again?
planets. I
Yeah,
always
like
blame it on the planets.
literally, literally anything. But like in the past, like whenever we first met, we first started working together. I first started like exploring being in my body and like all of these like different ways that feel very like natural for me at this point. My baseline of disassociation was like I literally like left the world, like
Mm,
don't know what happened, like I have no memory, like I've existed for weeks without really even knowing what happened, and just kind of, and like high functioning existing, like no one knows, right? And at this point, like I can feel, and I like, I don't know, I might skip over your question. Sorry, this is just like coming,
but
but
let it
like,
come.
but like, I've like the last couple of weeks, I've been just like, oh, this is super interesting because I'm so much in my body that like I'm feeling so much. And even in the moments that I'm disassociating, I'm still feeling a significant amount. And
Mm,
so what I've what I've been like really working through and playing with is like feeling pleasure and feeling the like discomfort and like overwhelm that comes from pleasure for me. And
mm,
so like feeling into my body like sexually specifically is something that like I really enjoy. It is a big part of my like identity. It is a big part of my personality. It's a big part of how I want to exist and in my life. It's part of what makes me feel good being alive and being like in my body in such a way that I'm like I can like to like relate to the pelvic floor question. Like I can feel my pelvic floor so intensely
mm.
that it's making me uncomfortable. But not in a way that it has before. I'm just like, oh my God, like, can everyone tell? It feels very exposing
That's
in a way,
interesting.
that like I hadn't, I haven't been able to associate with before. And So for like a little backstory to history, like my pelvic floor, and we've talked about this before, like in across the spaces that we've like entangled, like my pelvic floor is very loud. And so when something is a no for me, like it's activated, it's turned on, it's like giving me information. If I don't listen, it's like, okay, we're going to make you suffer. And so I get like pelvic infection, like I'll get a yeast infection pretty instantaneously if I'm not listening to what my body's saying. And so I've really, really been working on that. And it's funny because I think we talked about this on the last episode, which you said was a year ago. And like this last year, I've been really committed to like myself in a way that like has been really fucking annoying and hard and challenging my identity, challenging my like challenging so many parts of myself. But I'm feel like I was reflecting this week and I was like, I feel the reward of the work in a way of like,
Mm.
oh my God, like I've said I want to feel pleasure. I've said I want to be able to have the capacity to hold more in this spectrum. And I'm doing it and it's still scary, but also pretty cool.
Okay, I love that. What would you say, I guess, what would you say is the most challenging part, or like how have you committed to yourself? Like what are these changes, I guess, in holding being able to hold more in your own capacity? I mean, just also, I guess, side note, because you haven't brought this up, but yeah, you turned 40 this year and you had an amazing art show that, you know, showed your work from many, many years that I feel like hasn't gotten the exposure it's needed to get until you put it out there like this. And it was a big push for you. Um, but yeah, okay, I'll stop there. What do you have to say about that?
I forgot the first part of the question, but thank you
Well,
for
just
acknowledging that.
yeah, no, I mean like the challenges, like what you said you committed to yourself. Like what changed? What did that look like before you decided to commit to yourself? And what has that really looked like? I mean, I also know you gave me this book, Claim Your Power, and that I think maybe that's a part of it. Maybe there's some things you took out of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that like I'm a very passionate person and I'm very optimistic and a little bit naive in my in my like optimism. Um, but I also highly value that about myself. Like I feel when I feel like heavy or way down or like the emotions that we associate with negativity, it's because I'm not in my expression and
Mm.
I'm being contracted in some kind of way and in my optimism, in my belief of like possibility for change. And so I think that like a lot of what came up for me around this time last year was like how much of my power I give away and in the ways that I do that. And so like so something that I've been really assessing and softening with is like my connections and my truths and what is for me between intimacy and fear and shame and how those really have been like driving forces in my life. And so just like a little backstory about me is like I I feel that I've been the same person my entire life. I feel that I've like in so many ways. Like I've always been very passionate and creative and had very the ability to have really big fantasies and very confident in my own existence on my own and very secure being alone. And I also really, really, really value connection and connecting with other people. I love and have a high value and desire for family and like community. And because of my like makeup, like through astrology, through human design, because of my like conditioning through my like childhood like experiences and my adulthood experiences that have like also been shaped from my childhood experiences, I am a very sensitive person. My capacity to feel everything outside of me is really high. And so kind of navigating through like these permissions, like what I've learned is like I have had a lot of repression in my life, not only from like other people but from myself, because the way that I feel is very, very big. And so I have spent a lot of my life like really repressing like myself, my sexuality, my sexual expression, which is also my creativity, which is also my way of like being relational and relating with people. And I was talking with a friend about this yesterday, who also is a person that comes from like, is like multiracial, right? And so we were talking about how the way we experience like racism and um, like hypersexualization and the way others like have this like take energy towards us is very unique. And there's few spaces that we can like really honestly communicate about this. And so something had come up for this person and they were kind of like sharing with me, and I was like, you can share with me in this space because I'm not experiencing this same situation, but this is very familiar. And I understand in a very specific way that I feel like Black people don't understand, that like other people, other races don't understand. It's very much, I feel like this multiracial like, biracial experience that you don't quite fit in anywhere. And so that for me has given me this like very early in my life gave me this like confidence that was still very insecure,
Mm.
where I had to create space for myself and I had to create space for like owning my feelings and like validating myself in a way that no one else could, because no one else around me was in the same experience as me, like not even my brothers, not even my parent, like no one could really feel what I was feeling. And because of the way that like people like projected onto me like their desires, their fantasies, their visions, it made me feel very contracted and like a desire to not be seen and to not express and to not be desired as like someone else's object. So I've been like kind of like mulling over that in a lot of ways, like how it shows up in my creative expression as a photographer, as an artist, as a writer, how it shows up in my like in the way that I show up at work. But especially how it shows up for me, like in my relationships and in my sexuality and in my sexual expression.
Mm. That's a lot to chew on and a lot to feel into right there. I just like hearing you speak about it and like how you navigate all of this. And I'm glad you brought in um, that I guess, childhood experiences that, of course, inevitably impact your adulthood experiences, and including the fact that you are multiracial and that people do project things onto you, that it's interesting to hear um, that it kind of made you feel this repression and, wanting to be, in effect, smaller, to not be seen, and then impacting you now in a way where, like I said, you are an incredible artist, photographer, writer, creative, visionary in a multitude of ways and in a multitude of um I guess fields of work. And it's just really, I'm just going to reflect this back to you, but like it feels like this past year, maybe especially, has, I guess, probably almost since you moved down to North Park, maybe like you've been able to tap in and express, like maybe first within this community down south and in a, yeah, different friend group and different working community, and you've been able to come out and show yourself in a variety of ways and a variety of offerings that you've had over the past few years, but it feels more refined and the opposite of repression, whatever that is. Fully expressive.
Yeah, I think I think that like what I've really been giving permission for is the fact that, and this is so cliche, like, no, I'm not the person who made this up. I'm not the first person to say it, but like how growth and evolution and change is non-linear, right? Like healing is non-linear. So everyone's on their own like path and plane. And so like my path and plane is going up and down. And from the outside, like I can be perceived as like, oh, you're so intimate and you're so this and you're so that. And in my own lens, like there's so much more that I have to work on and so much more that I have to do. And it's been really interesting kind of like allowing myself to pulse between like my hyper like focus on like what I need to fix
Mm,
because I'm a fixer. I want to improve things. I want for things to be beautiful and I want for things, and I am included in that. Like I want to be my best self all the time. And it's been really like interesting to kind of like hyperfixate and then scale back and then hyperfixate and scale back. And I think that that is the process of intimacy, right? Like you're really like diving into something, whatever that is for you, and then you're scaling back to look at it. That's the process of art. Like you're really
mm,
focusing on something to create, and then you're pulling back to see the bigger picture and then figuring out what's the next thing you need to focus on. And so like when we met, I was in a really open and growth centered space. And like when I got to San Diego, I hated it here. In parts, I still kind of hate it here. And I think that that's just probably going to be like what life is like for everyone
yeah.
in some kind of way. But like I was like struggling so much for my first like few years here, and I was like talking to friends, and my friend was like, "You should move. Why are you there if you?" And I'm like, "I feel like I need to be here. Like I feel like I need to get comfortable and settling and being still and like sitting through the discomforts." And I wasn't saying those exact words, but like scaling back and looking at the bigger picture, that's what I've been doing the last 10 years is like getting really comfortable with being uncomfortable and getting really comfortable with seeing like not only the like beautiful perfect parts of myself, not only seeing myself through the projections of other people and like shape shifting and becoming that, but like really fine tuning like who am I and who do I want to be, who am I and who do I want to be, and like finding permission for both of those to exist. And so like I think that like it's been interesting navigating through the same stresses and traumas and experiences over and over again in different ways, where a pattern for me is like welcoming in relationships that are either controlling or hold like some sort of like narcissistic patterns or hold some sort of way of like me really becoming codependent or someone
Mm,
becoming codependent with me, which these are all like very intimate things, right? Like it is a way of being intimate with people. And intimacy isn't just like the yummy, juicy stuff. Intimacy is also the hard things. And so like seeing these parts and choosing over and over again different ways to try to like understand this part of myself and allow this part of myself, but also pushing myself towards how I want to experience life versus being in this like responsive or reactive flow.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned this pattern, and is with this awareness, I'm assuming that you're able to kind of catch it a little sooner if that's not something you want to experience again. I'm curious if your pelvic floor is speaking to you in those moments and being loud in another way, and that's what's telling you, or what's like, I guess, signaling to you that this is happening again, and or if there's that discomfort or that disassociation happening and you're able to like witness it all over again and then do something about it.
Yeah. Um, well, like circling back to like the feeling of like wanting to be small, right?
Mm,
Um, I think that that's a pattern for me where it's like being big, taking up space, being in my full expression is unsafe, right? Like it's unsafe for whatever reasons, depending on what I'm feeling is going to create that story. But I think that what I've been experiencing and exploring is okay, when I have a feeling, how long is it going to take me to like own that feeling?
mm,
And by feeling, I don't mean emotion, right? It's not a mental thing, it's like a sensation that I'm talking about in this moment. Like when I have a feeling, how long is it going to take for me to pay attention to that feeling? How long is it going to take for me to like create a connection so that I can make a language and find the story that's connected to that feeling?
mm,
And so whenever I can identify with myself, like whenever something is happening in a romantic relationship, in a sexual relationship, and or in work, which are all like in parts related to like my root chakra and to my like my sacral
sacral.
chakra.
Mm-hmm.
I get like this this burning almost. And sometimes it's just like really, really light. It's like small and I'm like, oh, like I don't know. I don't know what that is. But what I learned like through some of like our work that we've done together is like my tendency is to contract, right? So the contractions that I can see in my body that happen from the ways that like I ignore is the contraction happens. I have like a teeny tingle and I'm like, oh, like maybe I didn't change my workout pants quick enough. Maybe I'm getting a yeast. It's always maybe I'm getting a yeast infection.
Mm,
And what I've been doing the last like year is like slowing down on like fixing the yeast infection and like really just like settling like what is it that I'm feeling. And if I like ignore it, then I get constipated. And if I get constipated, then I get a yeast infection. Because what's happening in my body that I'm seeing that is my own pattern. And so I'm not saying this is what's happening for everyone. I'm saying this is what I have seen as a pattern within myself is like I get a sensation. Sometimes it starts in my gut and my solar plexus. Sometimes it starts in my heart, right? Like or my throat, but like it's somewhere in this range. And then it creates this little tingle in my pelvic floor. And I'm like, I usually ignore it, right? I'm like, oh, like maybe it maybe it's 8 million other things. And then if I keep pushing through the thing that is that like my body's trying to signal like we need space, we need pause, this is a no, like whatever, then my whole pelvic floor starts to tighten. And when my pelvic floor starts to tighten, I start to feel pain, I start to feel burning, I start to feel sensation. That moves into my digestive tract, right? Then I start getting constipated, then I start getting uncomfortable, then I don't want to eat. Like, so it's just this whole cycle of things
mm,
that like happens from me ignoring like the intuition of my body. Um, and it's just been really like fascinating to be like, oh, what if I just slowed down? And so, like, even recently, I have a newer connection that I was like, oh, this is a yes. And then 5 days in, I was like, oh, this feels like a pattern.
Mm.
And then, like, in that moment, I was like, this feels like a pattern. Like, started feeling sensations, and I was like, oh, like, and wanting to ignore it because that is also a pattern, right? For me to be like, no, it's something else, no, like, and so I've just been like kind of flowing with that. And part of my process to like give myself the space and time to like really identify like, is this a response? Is this a pattern? Is this my intuition? Is this my trauma? And like it's something that is a yes, but my trauma is telling me that it's a no, has been to just like create space for more slowness, and then also to journal to myself and be like, I will not leave you. I will not abandon you. I am here for you. Doing inner child work where it's like, this is a big part of why my body is so loud, is because at a moment that my body's like, hey, like, I have information for you. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to abandon you. I'm going to do something else.
Well, it sounds like there's like overall, it sounds like this is a practice of trust building with your body. And I don't
Hmm.
think we've talked about trust yet, but I liked how
No.
you phrased it earlier, where you were like, you you have the feeling or you have the physical sensation, and then it's just a matter of time. Like, how long is it that you bring that connection back to that feeling, develop a language? I loved how you said that, because that's what it feels like, when you have the sensation and then you are asking all those questions like, is this no, is this a boundary thing? Is this a physical thing that I've been ignoring? Is this is this a trauma response, or is this something else? Like, and then I know for you, similar to myself, my mind goes a mile a minute and has all these reasons, and it's like so tangled. So journaling for me too is a huge thing. I was just doing that earlier today for inner child core wound shit. Please love me. you know. Um but I'm really enjoying you map out this, I guess, inner experience that you've had over and over. Um and Okay, so keep going. Sorry, I wanted to drop that nugget of like, this is a development of trust within your body, and I think the practice of realizing it, and I think this is why I love you and I love the work that we both are doing and are in, not just for ourselves, but obviously professionally too. Um, Developing this language as just a roadmap, I guess. I think it's needed. So,
Yeah. I love that you said the word trust because that's been like very loud for me, where like even with this new connection and like what I've been doing is like breaking relational patterns. And it's been really hard, right? Like I've been breaking relational patterns, and that's for someone like me, it is more complex than maybe someone who has had more positive experiences in relationships. And I've had really great, beautiful relationships that have taught me what it is to feel secure in relationship, that have taught me what it is to be like valued and loved and respected and cared for, what it is to be able to have agency in relationship. And I've also had really, really hard relationships that have taught me what it is to be controlled and to be abused and to be devalued and to be like manipulated. And so what happens for me a lot in relationships is like this battle of trust, because I've had the experience of being like mentally and emotionally and physically abused, and I've had that experience of being put into places where I don't know what is true. And
mhm.
so building trust with myself has been part of my life's journey, and it's going to continue to be so. And it has been something that has been really, really hard for me to admit and to find my power and even more so, because I think that it's easier for us to admit that we have been wronged and that we have experienced things that have like created these places of protection, that have created these barriers that keep us away from the things that we want. And like something that I want is closeness and connection and intimacy and care and love and expression and openness, right? And the things that I've experienced have like put barriers between that, because it has created this way of feeling really confused, of not trusting others, but mostly not trusting myself, because of past experiences. I've put myself into places that taught me that like I am untrustworthy for myself, right? And so it's been a commitment to forgiveness, a commitment to like releasing shame, a commitment to seeing all the parts of myself and like removing these layers that have like protected me, so that I can exist a little bit more vibrantly and bigger and more expressively and more confidently, and not from a place of this like show, but like from a place of like really, really deep authenticity. And so it's been really interesting. In July, I started working with a personal trainer because I was just like, I really want to take care of my body. Like, I'm about to be 40. Like, I want to be strong and I want to be mobile and I want to like feel good, not only from like, oh, like people desire my body. Like, I think it looks good, but really from a place of like, my body feels good in every single way and I feel good existing in it. And so it's been really funny because my trainer is a great trainer in the sense of, you know, like counting my reps and like pushing me past like my like comfort zone of like how much weight can I do. But like beyond that, like my trainer is also very like trauma informed and somatically centered, unintentionally, and I think in parts intentionally, you know, where I'm like in a thing and he's like, "Oh, what's coming up for you?" And and like whenever we first started working together, I was just like having so much like stimulation around like my body growing, about becoming bigger. And I think that like part of my like shrinking, like that desire to shrink, was also I have lived in this body in the shape that it's in, like the feminine shape that it's in, since I was 10. I got my period at 10. I've been like in my like womanness since I was 10. So I've been very like objectified from a like for most of my life. And so from a safety mechanism, it was like, oh, like I don't want to be seen in this way. I want to be smaller. And so like it was funny because whenever I first started working with my trainer and he's like probing questions, like with permission, I welcome that from him. I'm like, oh, like I don't want to be seen, and like that's why I wanted to be smaller, and like da 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 da. And you know, he's like, oh, why do you want to be smaller? Oh, what is this? Oh, it's funny that you're doing this work around like sexuality and kink, but you're like not wanting to be seen and sexualized, you know? And so I'm like, shut up and count my reps, but also ask me more questions.
Yeah, this is a curious thread. Thanks for highlighting it for me, I think. But yeah.
Yeah. So it's just been really funny because like
Mm.
even in that, like, you know, we're working and like we're building my strength and I'm like feeling like pulsing the discomfort of like putting myself out there in this way that I want, like I desire to be seen in part, and also like taking that in a way of like I have control over it, right? Like I'm not being objectified unwelcomely. Like I'm putting myself into a place and position where I can share myself and people can appreciate that. And so I think that that's kind of been the like ebbs and flows of what I've been playing with over the last few years. But I see it in a very specific way at this moment.
Mm. That's super interesting to me. I feel I don't know why, but I mean, I know why, but it's um like the being small or even like being bigger, being desirable through whoever's lens or not desirable through whoever's lens. Like it's so interesting. I feel like yeah, you kind of have to just I guess without it getting too convoluted, like it's important to come back to like why you're doing the thing you're doing and if that feels just like true with a capital T and not doing it to say avoid something or hide away something or to attract things for like you said for show or for attention or whatever like
Mhm.
validation from other people. I feel like that's a whole other episode kind of like
For, for sure. And it's fun, like you saying that, like just kind of what I realized in the last couple of years, like in my journey, like in explorations, especially in like becoming like a member of the kink community and being really present in that space was the Sagittarius in me loves. I love performing. I love being the center of attention, but I only want it in the way that I want
yeah,
it. But so it's been this like interesting like exploration of doing things that are authentic. Like it's authentic for me to perform. It's authentic for me to show off my body. It's authentic for me to be very sexual. It's authentic for me to be like to want to be objectified. Like I love it. And it comes in a very specific way. And because I love something, doesn't mean that I have to settle for like whatever is presented to me. And so that's been like, I think that like that's what I've really been exploring with intimacy, like specifically connected to like relationship and my sexuality and sex. And the way that like I'm existing versus the way that people are projecting onto me.
totally. I appreciate you saying that because also yesterday a reel was posted through MoveU and it's a hilarious reel, I think. And in it, I'm wearing the pelvic floor pants. We just call it the pelvic floor pants, but it's like nude leggings with a painted pelvic floor that we've had for years and years and years. And we've used it all the time. And yeah, that reel was meant to be super eye-catching as well as super educational and not meant to be sexual whatsoever. However, I was being projected on in my DMs by not even like many people, probably just by like one or two. And I'm like, I literally like shut it down. I'm like, nope, this isn't welcome here. Blocked. But yeah, it's like I want to be able to do the same things, like be big, be seen when I want to be and how I want to be. And it doesn't mean that you get to, I don't know, you get to walk into the space doing whatever you think you can do, I guess. It's not a permission slip for, I don't know, inappropriate, I guess, attention.
Yeah. And I think that like I like to be very like gracious with that, right? Like because because the way that I exist in the world and the beliefs that I have is like I've moved from a place of believing that people will have good intentions even when they do things that don't feel so good, right? And so sometimes like especially with like sex and sexuality and it gets really weird, right? Like it's like people do things to express themselves that isn't always in alignment with who they're expressing it with. And so
Mm,
like a side example, right? Like something that I experience that I hold space for is like unsolicited dick pics, right? Like I'm on a dating app, I'm on sex positive dating apps in this space. People are coming to this space with like a seeking of permission to be in their expression. And also, many people don't understand consent.
Mm,
They haven't taken the time to understand, and not just like a yes or no, it's like the depths of consent, right? And
yeah.
so whenever we're in these like broad open spaces, yes, sometimes people are just doing things like unconsciously and like being a jerk. But most of the time people are just like, oh my God, I'm so excited for something and have no idea, right? And so what also has informed that opinion for me is, instead of getting mad at people for behaving poorly, for doing bad things, in air quotes, bad things, if I have the capacity, I'm like, hey, like, that's not cool. Hey, like, I love a dick pic and I like to be asked if you like, it's just basic consent, right? And
Yeah,
it may
totally.
feel weird, and I just take a little extra time to have a conversation with a stranger. And I'll say more than half of the time, like, people respond with gratitude because they're like, oh, like someone took a moment to like not jump down my throat. And there are some people, like, usually if there's someone who like has more ill intentions, they'll just unmatch with me or they'll get reactive. But the greater majority of people are like, oh, like, I'm just trying to figure out what the balance is of being like expressive and
Hmm.
asking for what I want or seeking what I want or getting what I want and being a decent human being. And
Right.
so, like, that's not to say that that's what was happening like in your DMs, but just
Right.
to like
No.
that, just a different perspective on like a commonality that I think we experience in the way that people are playing with intimacy, right?
Well, I think that's an interesting dynamic happening too within, say, like these two different examples, right? Like me in the DMs with someone when I'm like wanting to be an educator, I'm wanting to be not quote unquote an authority and like have it be a hierarchy, but it's one way at this point, right? Like I'm only sharing it to give to you to learn essentially versus like being on a dating app and having that availability and openness. And I'm really glad that you named having the capacity to give an adjustment or an attunement for someone if they're coming at you unsolicitedly with pictures or messages even. But um what was I going to say also? But then yeah, like navigating that really wobbly line of um wanting to be super self-expressive and wanting to be able to be intimate with someone, kind of just to tie it back into this thread of intimacy, like getting to this place of intimacy with someone through an app. But yeah, like if you don't know the person yet, then what does that look like? And yeah, it's going to be a little bit different in each scenario. And as you go, it's going to be a constant, I don't know, experimentation, um,
Mm-hmm.
but also very
Yeah.
exciting and fun.
For sure. And I want to like circle back because I don't want for it to be perceived then like bypassing your experience, right? Like,
Oh, I didn't feel
I
that.
think I know you didn't, but maybe listeners, I don't want for them to
Mm,
be like, what the fuck? But it's
no,
it's
yeah.
really what I feel is that many people don't have like the nuances in intimacy, which is part of what our problem is. Many people don't have the nuances in sexuality, which is part of what our challenges are, right? And so a pelvic floor is a non-sexual thing. We sexualize it, right? Like, anatomy is anatomy. We sexualize it. Like, sex can happen from any body part, from anything. And that's what I love about kink and people who feel confident in expressing those parts of themselves, is that we create that attraction. We allow that attraction. And so what happens in the like everyday world is people who have so much repression or who have not had the spaces to like express safely or feel safe in their expressions either don't express at all or they over sexualize things that are non-sexual.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's where like this frustration as like educators, as sex positive or like art, like I don't see my naked body as like a sexual space. I see my naked body as art. And so whenever I'm like creating with my naked body, I'm not like, oh, please look at me and like objectify me in a sexual way, unless I'm with a lover or I'm like posting pictures to an app where I want that, right? Like whenever I'm just
Right.
sharing and creating in general, I'm just like, I think the body is fucking amazing and so mysterious and beautiful and curious. And that's why I like photographing people in this way. And there's many other layers to it, but none of them for me are sexual.
Right.
And the same thing in my like private work or whenever I'm working with people one on one, like we're exploring sexuality and eroticism and intimacy and pleasure and healing and all of these things, but none of it is sexual for me. And like the sexual pieces are things that are like, okay, these could be tied to someone's sexuality, and we're working towards gaining more confidence in that space. But we are not here to like embody our sexuality. We are not here to like meet each other in our sexuality. So we can be in existence around things that are commonly like identified as sexual
Mm.
without sexualizing them, without acting on them, without like taking something out of context for the container that it's in.
Right. And the container you're speaking of, just to clarify for everyone listening, is like in the work that you're doing with people, not in the DMs or in the messages on the dating apps. Two separate scenarios happening.
Yeah. But also in that, right? Like whenever you're in the DM or like you're on the Instagram being like, here's a pelvic floor, the container is not a sexual container.
Yeah, totally.
But
Totally.
the general, like it's, that's why I say it's like nuanced is like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's so much understanding that like the average person isn't like tapped into.
Right. Right. And again, just kind of naming the language that we all need to develop and then exercise in our ability to be vulnerable, be intimate, kind of, I guess, navigate this really gray area of like, is this a sexual experience or is this a different kind of experience? Is this an appropriate container? Is this not an appropriate container? Like it's all a very fascinating place to live in.
Mhm. Mhm.
I feel like there are so many other places we could go in this conversation, but I know we're kind of running out of our time together, unfortunately. But okay, kind of to think ahead into the future. I know you have some big visionary plans of creating a space where people can explore an avenue of healing through their bodies, through breath work, through kink, through like intimacy containers and practicing interpersonally, either I'm sure one on one and in group. And I've been in these spaces before and they are phenomenal and people have amazing feedback about it. Do you want to share a little bit about the vision and then you can let everyone know how they can support you in building this?
Yeah. So I have a goal to open a physical studio next summer. I right now I'm feeling really insecure in that goal, and I'm just like holding that insecurity and the possibilities. But essentially, somatic wellness and somatic healing, I feel is of highest value at this moment in time. I think that as a society, we are very good at thinking and very disconnected from feeling. And also, whenever we think about wellness and we think about healing, like that is very connected to the fixing of us versus the existing within us. And so, what I really want to create a space for is existing and feeling and exploring and being curious. So, like, really merging art and traditional wellness practices like yoga and movement, and newer practices that have become more popularized, like, I don't know, like breath work and cold plunging, and just some anything to bring us into our body and to create sensation so that we can gain information and gain exploration. Um, I feel that like our sexual health and our sexual wellness is part of wellness. It's not a separation from it. And so I know that it is an edge, especially in the current state of the world. There's so much activation around body liberation, around female and queer and trans bodies. There's so much happening that is like really contracting people. And there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of like perception and reality and control. And what I really want to exist is a space that we can co create as people, that we can also embody safety in a way that feels good for us as individuals and as a collective. And so I think that that feels like a little bit like, wow, like a little lofty and maybe not super duper clear. But I don't think that this work is black and white in the way of here is this specific business plan and here's the like yada yada. And so that's kind of where I'm at in the moment is like, okay, how do I translate this like fantasy, this like space that almost feels a little bit ethereal into something that feels very grounded and rooted and accessible and achievable for us to have. Um, and I know that it's possible because, as you mentioned, I've seen it happen in the work, in the workshops, in the classes, in the community spaces. And so it's just giving all of that a permanent home to happen over and over again.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that vision. It is a lofty vision, but I feel like it can be absolutely rooted and brought down to earth out of your highly expressive and imaginative mind. I love it. I feel like it's going to be cool.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Any last thoughts? Any um closing remarks, I suppose?
Yeah, I'll say if any of this work feels curious for you, I'm kind of like putting together a space that feels like a little bit looser than some things that I've done before.
Mm.
Um, that I'm going to be sharing with the public, um, I believe starting next month. And it's the placeholder name that I have now, it may change. So is Intimacy Lab. And it really is just going to be a space to kind of explore these things for those people who navigate life from a place of a little bit more curiosity versus like needing a little bit more structure. Um, if you are curious about the vision or the goal or the space, or you want to support it, there's information on my website. There's a GoFundMe that has been designed to kind of future fundraise for this space, to make it possible and to make it sustainable. Um, and yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. Thank you so much for being here, Uni. I love hearing from you. I love hearing your experience. And everyone, go check out all these links in the show notes. I'll pop them down
Mhm.
low so you can check out Uni's amazing work and support her in this vision.
Yeah. Find me at selfstudylab.com.
Highly
Thank you.
recommend. Thank you guys. Bye.